I am Joel McLeod,
I'm Roland Tanner.
and welcome to our 9:05 roundup for this Thursday day. It's been a heck of a week, or a heck of a couple months for us as we covered the municipal elections happening in the 9:05. We're hoping that you found it enjoyable and informative, and maybe it helped fill in some of the gaps in your decision-making process. We hope so. In case you missed it, you missed a 3.5 hour marathon episode session Roland and I did on Monday night, just to cover jumping around from one municipality to the other in the 9:05 to see how the results were coming in. What were your thoughts, Roland, as overall on the election night?
There's a phrase, a very old-fashioned phrase, like the curate's egg, good in places. I never really understood the that phrase. It was good in places, basically. I mean, I think Hamilton had a good election night. Not the perfect election night, maybe for some, but good. A much more progressive council. Some old faces who, I don't think everybody knows where we stand. Those guys needed to move on. We weren't backing candidates, but there were certainly candidates we felt needed to move on. They did. The good candidates from the previous council are back. Most of the real troublemakers, and really, troublemakers is not too strong a term for some of the people on the old council, are gone. Sam Marula was kicking and screaming as he went out the door today, making it a very long, lengthy set of allegations at the Red Hill Valley inquiry, knowing that the inquiry basically gave him carte blanche to say what he wants because it's protected legally from things he couldn't say outside that room. So yeah, I mean, so some good things there. Some good candidates didn't win, but I think that was a good night. Elsewhere, Oakville, Rob Burton survived by the skin of his teeth against the challenger there.
Well, how about this? The fact that there were no changes really at the senior levels of municipal leadership in the 9:05 outside of, well, I'd argue there's not a change in Hamilton or in Vaughan, mostly because those two elections, the previous mayors were stepping down, so they had like brand new ones. But like Mississauga, Brampton, Burlington, Oakville, and Milton all reelected their mayors, some longer serving than others, with kind of very little change in council makeup either. Maybe like a couple replacements here and there, but
Burton was the closest one to losing. I mean, that was a very close race. But yeah, it's really hard to beat an incumbent. And sorry, I'm just blanking on the candidate's name. I really need to apologize for that because I should know it. Julia Hanna in Oakville. That's her second time running against Rob Burton. She ran him close in 2018. So she has, she's been going hard at Rob Burton for a long time now. She is established as the person to vote for if you want change. And she still couldn't quite do it. That just illustrates how very difficult it is to beat an incumbent in municipal elections. It's really not easy at all. And how difficult it is to overcome the name recognition thing, because if you look at Hamilton, we look at Vaughan, there's two former party leaders, and okay, they were both close races, very close races in both cases again, but the person with the name recognition ultimately won.
Well, it's not just a sign of how many, and also voter turnout was, I think Hamilton was 35%. I think at last check that when we turned off, but I don't think any municipal race went above 30%. Hovering between 25 to 30% was the average, I think, and that's telling of just how many people are tuned in to elections.
It is appalling. There's all kinds of reasons for it. I mean, you know what? I'm not going to blame. It's easy to just say, "Oh, you damn voters! You have no right to anything." People don't vote for a reason, and it's because we're not selling the election to people properly in a way that attracts them enough. It's a failure. Ultimately, it is a failure of media, of the political classes, of the municipalities themselves, to properly do things that will bring more people in. As we run these elections, the year of an election, there's a little bit of a splash about it. The way that the voters lists are created have not been good historically. Many people, particularly renters, are excluded. The whole thing is still geared to the idea of property ownership in many ways. So if you own 3 houses in 3 different cities, you get to you can vote in those 3 different cities, which is a strange kind of thing that we have still.
The other issue, and that's something that we have talked about, is that how maybe this is showing a bit of hypocrisy on our part, but just how minimal power a municipality has. I mean, the number. We're going to talk about this later in the podcast, so I don't want to, spoilers. But the number one issue for people was development and housing affordability. And if you look at any polls governing what were the issues affecting, 9 times out of 10, that was cost of living, housing affordability were at the top of those polls pretty consistently. You and I have talked numerous times in this podcast about how frustrating it is for a municipality to properly chart its own development, which is a pretty damning indictment of, I want to say, the provincial government. It's not just the progressive conservative. The Liberals are just as guilty of this, that they have not properly structured municipalities to give them the tools that they need to properly develop on their terms. You can give guidelines and goals that they must reach. I think that's fair, but the province just doesn't trust its own creations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that turns off people. People will complain all they want about, we want to choose where high rises go. We want to choose how things are developed and where the urban growth centers are, et cetera, et cetera. But the province won't truly give out those powers. The municipalities constantly have to go back to the province to say, like Oliver in the Dickens novel, please, sir, can I have some more? And it's just a cudgel that am I using cudgel?
Yeah.
a big stick that the province gets to beat the municipalities down with whenever they get too uppity, which is one of the things that I wanted to see in the municipalities was a bit more. I wanted to see a bit more change because we had people like Z Hamid on, who not necessarily about open rebellion, but just saying we need to stand up. The municipalities need to stand up for themselves a bit more and demand a bit more power and a bit more respect from the province. I don't know if we're going to get that with
and the municipalities need to be putting pressure on the political parties that might form governments in the future, whether that's the Liberals or the Greens or the NDP or whatever. They need to be putting pressure on those parties to be creating better legislation for the municipalities, to be, the 2 leaders who now, ironically, both mayors at the last election, had very little in their platforms about, hardly a mention of the OLT or the OMB, LPAT, whatever it was called that week. There was talk about affordable housing, but nothing about reform to municipalities, the way the democracy works in municipalities. And I think if the municipalities work better, they can get that onto the agenda. I mean, we are jumping somewhat ahead. I mean, and I said there were elections that were good last night, and there were elections that were less good. I think Milton really missed an opportunity re-electing Gord Krantz. I understand that the turnout was really bad. I mean, it's just it's a shame. It's a shame. I mean, they're also. I mean, I should say that There are now more women on Milton Council. There's more diversity, I believe, on Milton Council now than there was before. So there are good changes happening. But at that, the mayor's table, which is, you know, the mayor obviously is important, even if it is partly as a figurehead for a city. It kind of creates a tone.
But the idea of the mayor is that they are elected with a vision for the city as a whole. How do they want the city to progress? What sort of industry do they want to attract to the city? Do they want to build up the cultural flavor that they want to encourage and things like that? Gord Krantz doesn't even have an email. But that's kind of how out of touch that we are in that. And that's a sad state of affairs for a city of Milton's size and growing dynamicism. The other, kind of moving closer to Toronto, talking about Patrick Brown getting reelected as well as Bonnie Crombie getting reelected. I mean, those are two huge municipalities in the 905. They should have a lot of sway and a lot of power when they stand up and say, we need X, Y, and Z. My concern is Bonnie Crombie, I think, has a shot at really being the voice now for the 905. My worry is that if she tries to pursue that Mexit plan, that was a little kind of, in my opinion, a little bit of left field, she might lose the opportunity to really stand apart in being a leader. She seems to me the best poised right now to really stand up and say, we need to fight for some change. The other one is Patrick Brown is, I think, going to become a lame duck mayor. He's too enwrapped in scandal and innuendo that these things are still going to continue under his term as mayor, which I think is ultimately going to harm Brampton's chance to develop itself for the next 4 years going forward. And moving up to Vaughan, here's the thing. I think Stephen Del Duca, along with Andrew Horvath, now that they're mayors, maybe they have a chance to showcase to the voters there and the province as a whole, maybe what did we miss out by not giving them a shot at being premier this term? Will they follow through? Who knows? I can't say.
I'm a lot more hopeful about Horvath than I am about Del Duca.
True.
I have to say. I mean, he did everything that he ran on in his candidacy for mayor was basically to look as much like a conservative mayor as possible. To talk about, gridlock, which, let's just be bloody clear here. There's no city in the 905 that has any problem with gridlock. You may have traffic that is sometimes inconvenient. That's not gridlock. It's one of those phrases that people throw out there what is actual gridlock? Where it's when you can't get anywhere because the whole city is ground to a halt in such a fundamental way that you can't unpick the traffic jam at all. You're just stuck. I'm not sure if that's ever happened even in Toronto, to be honest. So stop talking about bloody gridlock. And he argued for a decade and a half at least that the answer to gridlock was better transit and better transportation. And he's just run a campaign which didn't mention those words, or hardly mentioned those words.
Well, also all of his solutions were pretty much at the provincial level. It would take a minister of transportation's order and the Ontario budget to start fixing it, such as coordinating GO Transit and 407 tolls was one of the solutions.
It's like,
when these things are out of his powers.
Someone running for the mayor says they're going to reduce 407 tolls. I mean, at that point, his campaign should have been over. That's the most outrageous garbage I've ever heard anybody say. It's from a serious candidate, at least, running for public office at a mayoral level. I mean, do we not know the history of the 407 and how successive governments have not been able to, short of taking the 407 back into public ownership, which would cost billions of dollars, you can't do it, basically. Yeah, I mean, it's so incredibly, it's insulting to the intelligence of the voters and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I'm very disappointed about that. I'm very disappointed that the so-called centrist progressive should basically for the sake of getting elected, just become a conservative overnight.
I do think it's interesting though that Rick, we mentioned this last night before we turned off the microphones and went to bed. Like right now in Queen's Park, there is no opposition to Doug Ford. Really not effectively. The NDP and the Liberals are both leaderless. They are. Who knows how that will, and nobody's chomping at the bit for either of those positions, which is maybe that's just another episode we should focus on the fact that we are a few months into the provincial mandate of Doug Ford. Both parties are leaderless, and there's nobody organizing that we know of for those positions, which is telling in itself for both the NDP and the Liberal parties.
I mean, there's people ruling themselves out.
Well, that's
Catherine Fife ruled herself out today, I think.
Yeah, like people are running away from those positions than they are jumping into it, which is telling. Anywho, so that leaves the question: well, who's the political opposition to Doug Ford's plans? And again, foreshadowing, folks, we're going to talk about this later in the episode, so stay tuned. But it's going to come down to the municipalities, the municipal leadership, the mayors, and quite frankly, as I said before, if that's the case, my money's going to be on Bonnie Crombie or Andrea Horwath now to really stand up and say, no, Doug, this is the line. We need this. We need an ability or power to properly address housing, housing affordability, and the like, because the current government's attitude is just, well, we just need to build more sprawl, essentially. And for a city like Mississauga, that's not possible anymore. They have no more sprawl to exploit. Hamilton just made in the last term, they voted basically to stop sprawl. They voted against expanding their boundary. What will this mean for the municipalities? They might have to start digging their heels in this term and say, no, no, no.
It should not be possible for the provincial government to overturn the very democratic, very appropriately done decision of the previous council not to extend the urban boundary and to focus on intensification, because intensification is what every government has talked about for the last since the Places to Grow Act, which was 2005, something like that. We've been talking about intensification, and Hamilton said, yeah, we're on board. We're going to do that. We're not going to just sprawl. There's no need for it. We don't need to do it. We can do it with all those empty parking lots downtown, all the empty spaces in our single family home neighborhoods. We can do it. And my prediction would be that will get overturned sometime in the next few months by the province. That is an outrage. And the first job of Andrea Horwath and the new council should be create merry bloody hell over that, and then go and talk to Halton region, which made the same vote a few months ago, and will be facing the same overturn of their democratic, carefully decided planning by the province, and say, hey, Halton, you've got the same problem we have. We're not going to take this anymore. We're going to do whatever it takes to stop this. We're going to talk to our residents. We're going to get them to work on this campaign to stop this, because it's not on. There's a reason why the federal government can't just arbitrarily do stuff in the provinces. Justin Trudeau can't, much as he might like to, just overturn a piece of legislation from Doug Ford. In other countries in the world, nor can they do that to cities. For some reason, Canada has, it's the worst mistake in the Constitution, this thing that put cities in the position of creatures of the government, but they are basically just sub-offices of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, with this sort of facade of democracy plonked on top.
Why don't we take a break with that? Because this is going to be what we're going to talk about in the next half, and so why don't we just take a break from that, and we'll be back right after this message from our sponsor. And we are back. So we've been teasing it all in the preamble for this episode. So why don't we just get into it? So yeah, we had a municipal election. Everyone's happy. Yay, new councils, fresh new council smell all around. Let's take it for a test drive. And it turns out the premier Doug Ford is saying, nope, psych, not so fast. The the CBC as well as the Narwhal in separate articles are basically talking about how the provincial government has come out and basically said that they are going to, long story short, override a lot of municipal zoning and development matters, starting with our conservation authorities. We talked about this with the Halton Conservation Authority way back in our episode, because this was something that Doug Ford tried to do before. He said he wasn't going to.
Oh yeah, I mean, he'd already weakened them.
Right.
Now he's gutting them.
This is like neutering them to an nth degree, and basically the idea is because, again, this is a government that doesn't understand government, so they're thinking, oh, these guys are just they get in the way of development. They're an unnecessary red tape nonsense when they're not. They're a very important part of ensuring that we don't build on floodplains. That when you build a house, you're not building it in what was once a swamp. You're not building it in a place that could one day flood your basement, or your foundation rots out. It's things like that are very important to homeowners. That's what conservation authorities were designed to do. Doug Ford's scrapping it, gutting them. Who knows, what the consequences will be. I don't think they'll be good. But he's also bringing willing to use ministerial zoning orders to promote development. There is a one silver lining. They did seem to bring in some mixed density usage.
Yeah, no, and
that's good.
And that's fairly radical. Not as radical as some people would want. So yeah, I mean, let's actually start with the good thing.
Sure.
So they have decided.
Sure, you take the good thing, Roland.
Well, no, there's plenty of bad. Don't worry. But to an extent, this is how they operate. It's like, we'll give people a good thing, and hopefully they won't notice the bad thing. Well, these kind of omnibus changes to the Planning Act, where, well, let's put it this way: the gloves are off this term. This stuff is a major changes to the way that planning is done, and the way that housing and development is monitored, and we make sure that things are safe and done rightly. And yeah, there's the good side to this, which is the veto that the cities have long had over single family home neighborhoods. Basically the homes where middle class people live, people who own their own homes with the double garages and their front yards, backyards, kind of archetypal. Well, literally, the phrase Doug Ford used himself today was the kind of white picket fence house that we all apparently aspire to. He is taking away that protection, and that protection is and has been far too strong, and has meant that all development either had to happen on green space or downtown, and that created problems. And I've certainly said that. I think we've both said that for a long time. It's like, yeah, so increasing density, gentle density in those neighborhoods is a good thing, and he has been. Now, there's a number of problems arising from that. One, immediately before the last election, he said he wasn't going to do it. He then ran an election saying that they weren't going to do it, and now the election is over, they're doing it. That is a lie. It is a travesty of democracy. This party has now run twice without any kind of platform. You're meant to run on a platform saying what you're going to do. We get a chance to judge it. Then we vote based on what you say you're going to do, and you form a government or you don't. They've broken the rules. I mean, the polite rules of engagement of our democracy were this is how it's supposed to work. They've thrown out that thing and say, no, we just want to govern. You vote for us, and then once we're in, we'll do what the hell we want. No one has been pushing for the gutting of conservation authorities. There's no public demand for conservation authorities to be destroyed. My understanding is most people like the conservation authorities. They like what they do. And believe me, they're not what's holding up development. They just are not. They do a very efficient job, and I can point to buildings in Burlington that have been built that maybe shouldn't have been built because under the current legislation to do with what's safe and what you can build where, they wouldn't be allowed. Now, but there again, there's the point. Those buildings will now be built again.
I think the interesting thing to take note is there seems to be a move by this government to remove I don't want to say barriers because that implies that they're there arbitrarily. The regulations regarding development in this province, and these aren't needless regulations. These are conservation authorities do an important job of helping us develop our cities away from floodplains, watersheds, wetlands, those kind of things that are needed for our environmental protection, our ecology, our protection against climate change, but more importantly, so that our houses aren't built on bad land. Like these are good things that shouldn't be needed. But again, this government doesn't see it that way. It's like because the developer says, "Well, I want to build on that piece of land, and I can make so many millions of dollars off that plot of land," but the conservation authority won't let me do it. It's laziness on the developer's part to say, "Well, okay, I need to find somewhere else to build." The Ministerial Zoning Order just says, "Well, we don't want to put up a fight with municipalities who say, well, we kind of want to have a say in how our cities and towns look." The result is a government that kind of spat in the eye of every municipal government last night, that every municipality went out, elected a new government, but didn't know that basically Doug Ford was going to come in the next day and say, yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what this council wants or what the city declares it wants. I'm going to roughshod it because my buddies say it's easier for me just to build on this plot of land. And I bring up that phrasing because Hamilton just had this debate a few months ago. Hamilton had this debate on whether or not they wanted to build into their white belt, the last remaining vestiges of developable green space in their boundary. And they said, do we want to expand into that? And the council, in one of their last good decisions, said, no, let's focus on infill. Let's focus on the crumbling downtown that needs new development, that needs new housing downtown. Let's build there first, then we'll worry about expanding later. Despite the fact that developers wanted to expand into that because it's easier. It's easier just to build a new neighborhood, a new detached white picket fence home than it is to renovate an older building, than it is to build an apartment building or a condo building. We have a complex issue of needing to develop living space for 1.5 million people, or probably more than that now, in the province. And rather than looking at inventive ways to preserve our green space and to meet this need, Doug Ford is basically just going for the lazy man's approach to say, well, if there's a field there, I'm going to build a house, and then I can say I built more housing. That doesn't meet the needs of what we require. It's a bad decision all around.
Yeah, I haven't seen the detail on the single family homes thing yet, but I mean they are actually risking some political. There's some political risk with that. But I mean, the one thing I would say about the kind of single family home increased density is that by and large, I do not see how that will be the kind of building that big developers are interested in or really able to exploit. That land already belongs to people. It belongs to individual homeowners. If you want to take your house and put a duplex or a triplex or whatever it's called on there, it's going to be the person who currently owns that house who is not a developer. So there's some good things there. I have to again say, okay, there's some good things there, but the cost of this is just utterly trampling all over local democracy. At every step of the way, when Doug Ford does anything to do with the municipalities, the price is less power for municipalities. They're already weak. He's making them weaker, and we need to trust democracy more, not less. And basically it's like, well, people get in the way, so kick them out of the OLT. I mean, basically nobody had any power at the OLT anyway. He's taking away whatever remaining power people had there, which was almost zero. The conservation authorities, they get in the way, get rid of them. Basically make the cities do their job so quickly and such a short time frame that they can't do it properly. They physically can't do it properly, so they either do it incompetently, in which case they're liable to be sued by someone down the road, or they fail to do things by the appropriate timeline, in which case it gets appealed to the OLT. So we're back to that situation where everything gets appealed to the OLT as a matter of course, which basically means that all significant development is now defaulting to being a provincial decision in the hands of a bunch of faceless nobodies who are appointed by the province.
I just want to say that I think Mike gets telling me that the notion of, we're going to be able to infill into duplex, triplex housing is a red herring. I don't think maybe you'll see a couple pop up in your neighborhoods. You might see a homeowner who says, you know what, I'm going to become a landlord and build that. The reason why is because the one-off projects, fine, you'll get that happening, but you're not going to get the massive industrial scale building. Like no developer is going to come into Hamilton now and say, okay, some of these buildings that need massive work, we'll tear it down and we'll rebuild good housing for people, affordable housing. They're not going to do that because the profit margin isn't as big. It's going to be more lucrative for them to go to Doug Ford and Steve Clark, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and say, listen, I need you to let me build on that plot of land there, that green field, that farmland that's there. I can build you 100 homes there with double car garages and a good yards in them. They'll look beautiful and all that, and I'll be able to turn a profit of a couple maybe $100 million or so, where the math works out.
Well, we were speaking to the Spacing podcast a couple of weeks ago, and that exact point came out, that someone has said, well, basically it's selfish Toronto denying, not allowing gentle density in single-family home neighborhoods is why we're getting sprawl. It's like, no, you'll get sprawl regardless, because developers, that's the cheapest option to a developer. It's like, give me a green field, I can build a house cheaply. It will cost the city more in terms of what they have to provide, but for the developer, it's the cheapest possible option. And that's not going to change with this change to single-family homes. Most people who own property in single-family home neighborhoods live in that home. They're not going to suddenly, the vast majority of them aren't suddenly going to wake up one morning and say, hey, I already have always wanted to live in a duplex, and I can build one on my own property. So yeah, it's not going to be a revolution. It's going to be more of an evolution, but I think that evolution could be good. But yeah, all the bad stuff that's going along with this is really bad. Coming back to the whole, we haven't looked properly at the strong mayor proposals yet. I mean, we have a bit, but they're not. I mean, let's dispose of the whole strong mayor phrase. These are not strong mayors. These are mayors with additional powers to do what the province wants. That's not a strong mayor. That's a
stooge for Doug
puppet
Ford.
Mayor, basically. Yeah, you're a strong puppet. And I think that's maybe the phrase that we should use from now on. It's another way to undermine the municipalities and to undermine their and basically there's this ridiculous confidence trick that's been done in municipalities when it comes to planning that Doug Ford is now extending to everything, and that is that you have to do what the province says. As long as you agree with what the province says, then we'll give you the powers to do it. But the fact that we're electing you and that you're meant to be independent politicians is just constantly undermined.
The danger is, and this will be my final thought for the night, the danger here is it going to be too much of a temptation for a mayor? Like my eyes are now on Andrew Horwath, because Hamilton was one of the cities that Doug Ford said, "Oh, I'm going to give this power to you," and I personally think it's a bit like making a deal with the devil. I think it would be for Andrea to get those powers. The expectation will be from Queen's Park, from the Premier's office, we expect you to use them on these things, such as pushing for development in the white and the white space that they just voted against. Are they going to bring that back to the table? Who knows?
Well,
Are they going?
Yeah, I mean, the irony is
that there's enough in there, like to choose your own city manager and the high profile positions. That's a tempting offer, and you say, okay, but if Doug Ford comes calling and says, "Hey, Andrea, I need you to use your powers to do this thing for me," is she going to have the backbone to say, "No, I'm not," and take them away?
And the irony is, everything is going to end up even more caught up in appeals processes to OLT or whatever body they create to do the thing, because they've already said that. So say Andrea Horwath wants to do something to do with maintaining and strengthening the decision to not sprawl, and I hope she would do that. Well, now under the strong mayor system, it's like, well, yeah, but does that go against provincial policy? Yes, it does. Well, and actually, well, we need a tribunal to decide whether it goes against provincial policy or not. So we'll take it to this tribunal, and we'll spend a couple of years deciding whether this is good policy or not. By the time it's gone through that, the election will come and the mayor will be gone. I mean, you're basically giving the province the power to second guess everything, and even as we've seen with the OLT and the OMB for decades and decades and decades, it makes the role of the cities an absolute farce. It's hugely costly, it's hugely expensive for everybody involved, including the developers. The other thing we should mention is that as part of the new proposals, Ford is rolling back development charges, and it's like, oh yeah, the great idea, let's get rid of those charges on developers that make housing more expensive or whatever. Well, if the developers don't pay for it, if the people who are buying the houses don't pay for it, who does pay for it? You're still going to have to pay for your drains. You're still going to have to pay for your garbage collection and your roads and your sidewalk. You're still going to have to pay for the fire service to cover the new property. Who pays for that? The taxpayer does. So what's happening is they are taking funds that are currently paid by developers and they are transferring them to us, the taxpayer, who will have to take that burden instead. And it's a fucking confidence trick. I'm quite annoyed about it.
Well, aren't we all? Well, I think that's it for tonight, folks. Hope you enjoyed the municipal election, both 2 days of it, and we're right back into the same mess that we were before, it seems. We'll see what happens next. Take care, everyone, and we'll talk to you Tuesday. Bye-bye.